Republican nominees prepare to face off in the all-important primary in the South. A Romney win in South Carolina could end the race, but a Gingrich victory is likely to extend it. You're watching Inside Story US 2012 from Washington. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu. Many thought the South Carolina primary might settle the nomination in the Republican presidential race, but a series of unexpected events have changed the dynamics. First, a recount of the Iowa caucus results handed former Senator Rick Santorum a victory by erasing Mitt Romney's 8-vote lead. While not a game changer, it's a psychological boost to Santorum as he goes into South Carolina. On Thursday, Texas Governor Rick Perry quit the race and endorsed Newt Gingrich. Meanwhile, Gingrich himself faced new challenges when his former wife accused him of asking for a, quote, open marriage. The second candidate debate in 4 days saw just 4 contenders on stage. It featured sharp clashes over who has the temperament, character and know-how to lead the party into a general election. Patty Colhane is in Charleston, South Carolina, and sent us this report.
The media center at the debate here in South Carolina shows just how big the interest is in this Republican primary nomination, not just in the United States, but really across the globe. And the votes that'll happen here in South Carolina will say much more than just who the frontrunner is. It could be seen as a fight for the soul of the Republican Party. There are 3 very distinct camps that have emerged. There's the Mitt Romney, who tends to focus more as a centrist on economic issues. There's Ron Paul, the libertarian, and then there are the social conservatives, Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum. Who wins this race here in South Carolina, a state known for having this huge base of evangelical Christians, will tell us just how powerful that contingent of the Republican Party is in 2012.
So what happens to the Republican nomination going forward into South Carolina and beyond? Joining me in the studio is Liz Mayer, who's a former online communications director at the Republican National Committee. She also advised the Perry 2012 campaign. We're also joined by Soren Dayton, a former staffer on the McCain campaign in 2008, now with New Media Strategies, a consulting firm. Also in the studio is David Mercer. He's worked on 5 presidential campaigns, most recently Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2008. Welcome to all of you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's start with Thursday's debate in South Carolina. That came just ahead, of course, of the primary that is going to take place in South Carolina on Saturday. And we had quite a fiery outburst in the opening moments of that debate when Newt Gingrich was asked about his personal life, specifically his marital history. And I should add here that it's a bit of a colorful history. He's been married 3 times. And in fact, he met wife number 3 when he was still with wife number 2. I think I've got that right. Yes, okay. Anyway, the debate was sponsored by CNN. The host is John King. Let's listen to the opening of the debate.
As you know, your ex-wife gave an interview to ABC News and another interview at the Washington Post, and this story has now gone viral on the internet. In it, she says that you came to her in 1999, at a time when you were having an affair. She says you asked her, sir, to enter into an open marriage. Would you like to take some time to respond to that?
No, but I will. I think the destructive, vicious, negative nature of much of the news media makes it harder to govern this country, harder to attract decent people to run for public office, and I am appalled that you would begin a presidential debate on a topic like that.
Liz Mayer, ladies first. Let's start with you. Very angry outburst there from Newt Gingrich right at the opening of the debate. The crowd loved it. Mm-hmm. But in the bigger scheme of things, does this hurt or help Gingrich?
I think this is going to help him. It enables him to sort of have his side of the story put out first, at the same time that the story was still developing and breaking. I think there was a very good point that was made to me earlier that I think that some reporters may be reluctant to go there with Newt again in future, quite frankly, and that may help him in terms of managing it. But I also think, you know, it's classic Newt. and the audiences respond to this.
But that can work two ways. I mean, they may be intimidated, but they could also become attack dogs as well.
Well, hypothetically, that's true, but I think the audience ultimately and the voters respond to this. They really like that aspect of Newt. And frankly, I think you've seen that in pretty much every debate. I mean, you could have a moderator literally ask Newt what his favorite color is, and I think it's totally probable that Newt's response would be, that is a ludicrous question. How can you inject that into a debate that's supposed to be about serious issues? I can't, it's undignified, I can't respond to that, and then proceed to get into something else. I mean, this is kind of what he does, and people respond to it really well, and so I think it was classic Newt. It was a way of handling it that seemed to conform with his normal method of engaging with moderators, and I think it will help him in terms of managing the story.
Well, as I said, the crowd certainly loved it. Let's bring in Soren Dayton. Soren, was it a relevant question? Because Newt Gingrich didn't seem to think so.
Well, I think the question has to be asked. You know, this story came out that morning, and there was no way that debate was going to complete without addressing it in some form. However, as the first question of the debate 2 days before, you're taking the angry attacks of an ex-wife and making it the center of this presidential debate without any fact-checking, any ideas about what's true, and that's a little too much, I think.
Do you think so, David Mercer?
I think with Newt, he has brought to a new art form the saying that the best defense is a good offense. And Newt is very skilled at not addressing the issue head on, but as we saw, attacking the media. Now, the issue itself and the fidelity question, the hypocrisy question in terms of, as we know, the day after he had asked his wife to have an open marriage, he was at a forum discussing family values and those very issues that he was having trouble in his personal life. So I think that's always going to hover over Newt Gingrich. I think you are correct in asking, does this hurt or help both in the short and the long run? I think it's actually going to provide a little energy for his campaign and could mean the difference by the margins on winning and losing South Carolina. However, in the long run, I think that when he finds himself going nationally, he's still going to have to address those issues. And as Romney himself said in an ad, he's got more baggage than a Delta 747, and this is part of it.
Right, but the Democrats must love this, the fact that this is becoming so personal.
Oh, we're glad to be in the bleacher seats on this little scrum or football game of contact, and we'll see who emerges from it all.
Well, let's look at how these candidates are featuring in the polls. Now, most polls released on Thursday show Newt Gingrich overtaking Mitt Romney in South Carolina. Gingrich has 33% support among likely voters, according to conservative polling outlet Rasmussen. Romney's support has fallen to 31%. 15% of likely voters back Ron Paul, who's held steady, while support for Rick Santorum has dropped to 11%. Liz Mayer, these polls are all over the place, and we know they've been shifting rapidly.
Polls always are all over the place, especially
day by day.
Yeah, with the 24-hour news cycle. I think that's inevitable to a degree.
Right. Let's look at some of the scenarios coming out of South Carolina. Mitt Romney wins. Is it game over?
I think it gets closer to being game over. I wouldn't say it's quite game over yet. At the end of the day, we have a very, very small number of delegates that are being awarded at this stage, and so it's not technically going to be game over for quite some time. But certainly, if he were to win South Carolina, I think that shifts momentum in his direction and enables him to, position himself better to win other states moving forward. Frankly, though, I don't think that that's the most likely outcome at this point. I think that it is more likely that Newt wins South Carolina, and that's going to set up some very interesting contests further down the road, in my opinion.
Do you think that to be the case?
I think that Romney would have to win very big to seal this deal post South Carolina and going into Florida. That's not going to happen, as Liz just pointed out. Question, I think it's still a toss-up, but it's going to be very, very close by the margins. That's going to fuel a lot of energy for Newt Gingrich to go to donors and ask for another couple $1 million to run some super PAC ads. It's also going to, referring to the delegate process, which is, you have your polls, you have votes, but we're really in a delegate hunt. And Ron Paul has a very lean machine and ground troops, taking a page from Obama's campaign in 2008, use of social media and getting more bang for your buck in terms of the deployment of those resources. And he can, in the hunt for delegates, live off the earth and continue on. So I think he's going to see both Ron Paul and Newt Gingrich trailing right behind him going out of South Carolina.
Right, that's something that Rick Santorum showed us in Iowa as well.
That is absolutely right.
Soren Dayton, let's look at another scenario going down the road, a Newt Gingrich win.
Yeah, I think, first of all, that's the most likely scenario tomorrow. And then we move on to Florida, which is a very, very complicated state. You have in the north it's really a microcosm of southern United States. In the south, it's almost New York. And then you have a variety of complicated demographics all over the state. And I don't think anyone has a clear advantage in any of these. And that's really going to be, it's really going to be a jump ball. But my opinion is closer to Liz's, that only with a Newt win in South Carolina does this go on at all. And I think, unlike David, I think that that Newt is going to be struggling for money unless he gets some decisive wins pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm. If I can add, what we're talking about here are the margins, and it's something to take into account. If you look at history, the candidates that have broken away started getting 40-something% of the vote. Yeah. And we haven't seen Romney now in 3 states do that, and it's unlikely that he does it here. Mm-hmm. And so until you see somebody break from the pack, and I do believe Romney is going to be the nominee because he's run a second time, he's got the most money, and the tradition of the Republican Party is to nominate somebody who's run a second time. That being said, we do not see him getting close to breaking 42-45% on any of these states, and there's no prognosis that he's going to do that going forward. And so I think this is going to be a little longer than the Republicans had anticipated.
This pushes the race way down. I mean, we could see it go right to Super Tuesday, right?
I could see it go beyond then, potentially,
Correct.
Depending on how all of this plays out. I mean, we'll know more, obviously, once the votes are counted tomorrow. But I think that this is a very sort of fluid contest. There's still a lot that's in flux here. There's a lot that's unknown about where things will go from here. And I think Soren's point about Florida is really important to bear in mind when you're talking about that, because we have 2 candidates here who look like they are going to be the final contenders, who have some real issues to go and have a fight about in Florida. For example, they've gotten into it about immigration. I think Soren may be in a position to speak to this better than I am, but my understanding is that when you're looking at Florida, for as much as tacking to the right on immigration may help in a state like South Carolina, it can really hurt you in Florida. And I think that that's something that we actually saw in 2008. That's going to be a question in this contest as we move into Florida, because Newt has taken a somewhat softer, more moderate line when it comes to immigration. Romney has really been going pretty hard line.
High Hispanic vote in Florida.
Yes, I think that that's right. I think also you probably have more moderate voters in certain parts of the state than what you would have in South Carolina anyway.
The Hispanic vote in Florida is also diluted by the fact that there's a large Cuban population. They tend to vote in a bloc.
Sure.
And many of them tend to vote for the Republicans.
This is true. However, I think when you're looking at how those Cuban-American representatives have tended to vote on immigration issues, they are not to the right of the party, suffice to say. They're not with Tom Tancredo, who incidentally I believe endorsed Mitt Romney in 2008. That's going to be a real question mark. Today, as I understand it, Newt has actually got a radio ad up in Florida hitting Romney as being anti-immigrant. It will be very interesting to see how that plays out. The flip side of this is that also I think you've got a large older population in Florida, so entitlements are an issue here. Newt obviously got himself into quite a lot of trouble.
Social Security,
Medicare, yes, exactly. Newt got himself into quite a bit of trouble this summer over his comments on the Ryan plan, which obviously would have reformed Medicare in a way.
Was it right-wing social engineering?
I think, yes, that I think was the catchphrase. I think I'm allowed to say that. I think he basically blessed anybody using his words. Yeah, so that's a concern. He got hit over that. Romney has deliberately attacked and directly attacked Gingrich on that, and so you have a couple of these issues where actually, potentially, Gingrich could benefit depending on how all of this stacks up and how much money he's got.
If I might add on Florida, going to what Soren said and what Liz is saying, key marker or indicator are past and current governor. And in South Carolina, we have a governor whose poll numbers are in the 30s. She was probably hoping that Romney, in that endorsement, Nikki Haley, would maybe help her. And she's been doing a lot of things nationally, challenging Justice Department on voter ID laws. She's trying to keep a national profile. You're going again into a state where there's another governor also in his 30s. And so there is no one who can sort of bring the state to the candidates. And the candidates have not been able to break out of 35, 40% in capturing the vote. And whether Jeb Bush comes in and maybe becomes a deciding factor would be very interesting and telling on Florida.
Okay, let's look at some of the issues that came up in the debate there. Healthcare was one of the issues that came up in the debate. There were some comments directed at Mitt Romney, and the reason for that is, as governor of Massachusetts, he introduced a healthcare plan which very closely resembles that the president introduced, something that's known as Obamacare here. And he was slammed by Rick Santorum during the debate for bringing that plan in Massachusetts and now saying that he supports something that is totally private. Let's look at that part of the debate where Rick Santorum has a go at Romney.
Governor Romney tells a very nice story about what his plan is now. It wasn't his plan when he was in a position to do a plan. When he was governor of Massachusetts, he put forth Romneycare, which was not a bottom-up free market system. It was a government-run healthcare system that was the basis of Obamacare, and it has been an abject failure, and he has stood by it. He stood by the fact that it's $8 billion more expensive than under the current law.
Soren Dayton, Mitt Romney's been accused of being a flip-flopper on a number of issues, healthcare being one of them. How much of a problem is it for him?
Well, we haven't seen the discussion of a lot of these issues. We've seen on abortion this really starting only in South Carolina, and on healthcare. But you know, David was talking about the inability to break 40%, and these sorts of reasons are why Romney hasn't been able to really break into the conservative vote.
You know, another big issue is Mitt Romney's taxes. He hasn't released his tax returns, and there have been calls almost every minute for him to release those tax returns. He says he might do that sometime around April when he files this year's or last year's tax return. Maybe, yes.
Maybe, exactly.
He doesn't seem willing to do so, though. You know, he seems to be, being forced to release those tax returns. He was asked a question about that in the debate. Let's listen to his response.
Back in 1967, your father set a groundbreaking, what was then a groundbreaking standard in American politics. He released his tax returns. He released them for not 1 year, but for 12 years. And when he did that, he said this: 1 year could be a fluke, perhaps done for show. When you release yours, will you follow your father's example?
Maybe. I don't know how many years I'll release. I'll take a look at what our documents are.
David Mercer, why this reluctance? Is there something in those tax returns that's very embarrassing to him, could derail his bid, or is he simply embarrassed because he's so rich?
Well, we don't want to get out in front of Mitt Romney himself, but you've seen in reports from the Washington Post, from ABC News, that from his financial disclosures, which are a little more of a surface document than what you would find in detail in tax returns, that there is offshoring of investments. And I think he doesn't want the dots connected, that if in his taxes it shows that he has all these investments offshore can then be tied back to the Bain story. And whether or not Bain and him in his chairmanship
being the company that
led to outsourcing of jobs away from the United States. And that's a narrative that is, I think, too much for them to handle when they got Newt Gingrich hovering over them in South Carolina. However, he has got to do it. And as anybody will tell you, Lanny Davis, for one, who dealt with, as counsel to President Clinton, get the facts out immediately, he's got time to do that. But I think, again, because of the competition that's emerged, he's got to focus on the bodies in front of him before he takes on the message. But it's complicating. As we all see, he's talking more about Newt Gingrich and maybe on tax returns than he is now on Obama, which he was doing at the beginning of the campaign.
Does this have the potential to hurt him? And is he going to be able to push disclosing these documents until April?
First of all, I think it's already hurting him. And I think that part of why it's hurting him is because people have a sense that what is in those documents that he does not want people to see basically is stuff that ties in with the Bain storyline, which I do believe has been damaging to him in South Carolina. Newt has obviously gone straight at him over that. Frankly, the candidate that I was consulting for, Rick Perry, went after him on that to a certain degree also. I think it's been very damaging, and I think that the tax return story does continue to feed into that, and it is problematic for him. I don't think he can wait until April. And hopefully his taxes are not complicated enough that he has to wait until April, because if he does, he's going to have to put up with months of people asking him difficult questions that he frankly has demonstrated he does not have a good answer to.
One other issue, and when it comes to the national matchup between President Obama and whoever is the Republican nominee, it's going to be all about the economy, isn't it? It's going to be about jobs. There was a question of the outsourcing of jobs last night, Thursday night, in South Carolina, and that was about Apple, which is an iconic American company, incredibly successful, very rich company. But all its manufacturing is done outside of the United States. Let's take a look at that exchange there.
Apple's a great company, but the way you ask the question, it infers that because there's a bunch of workers overseas, it hasn't benefited a lot of people here. The consumers obviously have been benefited by a good company, well run. But obviously there's a lot of employees with Apple in this country as well. I don't think that's the number that you have to be concerned about. A lot of people worry about us buying and money going overseas. But if you send money to China, let's say they're paying wages over there and we send dollars over there, well, they don't put the dollars in a shoebox. They have to spend those dollars. Unfortunately, they're buying our debt and perpetuating our consumerism here and our debt here.
That was Ron Paul, of course, the Republican candidate, who's also a libertarian. David Mercer, he makes a good point, doesn't he?
He does, and I think it speaks, this is an integrated problem. It speaks to education, which, as we know, Obama wants to see us improve our education. He's working with corporations to bring in, to have more engineering graduates because they're in China now. And they are, they're attracting a lot of the manufacturing. So it's a very complicated and integrated situation. And we have to, again, focus domestically on how we can improve our standards and our skill base so that we can keep more jobs here. As you know, last week on Tuesday, the White House had an insourcing conference to get commitments from manufacturers and other companies to have a public-private partnership in bringing jobs back to the United States, which is beginning to happen. We saw in the last 2 years a growth of 334,000 additional manufacturing jobs that we have been losing for decades. So it's a trend line that we have to reverse and see to an increase.
Okay, Soren Dayton, I want to look way beyond the primaries and the caucuses right now to the national matchup. Finally, whoever's the Republican candidate against President Obama, and it comes down to the factor for the Republicans, of course, of electability. We hear from many quarters that Newt Gingrich is not electable, Mitt Romney is. How does that play out among the Republicans?
Well, I'd say that Newt's making really three core arguments. One, that he's more conservative. Two, that Romney's electability argument doesn't really work. And this is Bain, this is taxes, this is overall the sort of class style argument we're seeing. And Romney's is he's got the resources, the organization, and the electability. But if his fundamental argument, electability, is getting undermined and his job argument's getting undermined, there's no rationale to elect him in the primary. And the Democrats I talk to are really excited. We're having this broader debate about income inequality, and here we have a guy who probably made $500 million. This is the perfect caricature of a rich Republican figure to wrap all these debates around. So the Democrats have got to be excited with Romney.
Soren, thanks. We have 10 seconds.
I would only say that, you know, there's no concern really on electability because they're going to possibly, the conservatives line up behind Newt Gingrich.
Okay.
This is like a football playoff to get to the Super Bowl. We'll worry about winning the Super Bowl later.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for joining us. And that is it from the team here in Washington, D.C. for now. But of course, we want to hear from you. Tell us what stories you think we should be covering. You can send your ideas directly to us at InsideStory@AlJazeera.net. Bye for now.